Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hi, welcome back to another Chats from the Blog Cabin episode. I'm so excited you're here. Today we are chatting with Jane. She's the author of I Died on a Tuesday, which I will say is a fascinating book. So many twists and turns in this book. I actually finished reading it yesterday and I was just blown away by how many twists and turns you actually had in this book. But you're not only a writer, you're also, you've lived a life. So welcome to the show, Jane, and tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I knew I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, I knew from the word go. I was hopeless at maths, and I was at a school which had great expectations, which in some ways was a great thing. In other ways made me feel pretty dim because I was no good at maths or science. But what I did love was writing stories. And I remember going to a careers talk when I was about 17, saying that I wanted to be a writer, and somebody patting me on my hand and saying, there, dear, it'd be much more realistic to have the sort of career that would be much easier to get into. And that really upset me because all I wanted to do was write. So I decided I'd read English at university because I love books. And then after that, I trained as a magazine journalist. But all that time, I wanted to write novels. I got married, had my 3 wonderful children, started freelancing from home so I could bring them up while also writing. And then I started to write novels, and I wrote quite a lot, which didn't get published. I sometimes think it's because I didn't spend time revising them enough. I was so busy cramming it all in, looking after my children, having a meal ready for my husband. He got home from work, etc., that there really wasn't enough time to do everything. And then I did get published, which was very exciting. I got 9 romantic novels published. But my first marriage then ended after 28 years. And I found myself in need of taking a job which paid more regular income than my freelance journalism. So I saw an advert in a paper that said wanted a writer in residence of a high security male prison. And that wasn't something I ever really wanted to do. In fact, the whole idea of prisons terrified me. But I needed to do it financially on top of the maintenance I'd been given, obviously. And I found that I wasn't able to write romance anymore because I was dealing with men who'd committed the worst crimes you could imagine, helping them write so that they could address these crimes. I found myself becoming more and more interested in how crime affected families. So I wrote a book called My Husband's Wife, which my agent sold around the world, became a bestseller. And I Died on a Tuesday, which I'll hold a copy up here, is my 10th novel for Penguin now. Very exciting. And of course, in the States and Canada, I'm sold there by Doubleday.
Yeah, I will say that once I read your bio, because I read the bio after I read the book, I'm like, she learned a lot in that prison because I think you played on some of the experiences or some of the things that you learned into this book. Because this book is like, when you think you have it figured out, you're like, nope, here comes another thing, another wrench that you threw in there. So what made you decide to write something as like dramatic as I Died on a Tuesday?
Okay, so I love drama. I love thinking about how life works. I think it goes back to my magazine days. I still write for the Daily Telegraph, by the way, and a few magazines. But when I wrote for magazines all the time, we would write features called TOTS, which is Triumph Over Tragedies. And they were features about people who had overcome things. So, for example, I always remember interviewing a mother whose little girl had wanted to be a ballet dancer, had tragically got run over and lost a leg, but then got an artificial leg and was able to dance. So I like tragedies which actually then have a good ending. Let me start again, actually. Every single book that I've written has a particular kind of tragedy, crime, huge event that needs looking at, huge problem that needs solving. And the idea for I Died on a Tuesday came from 3 memories in my head. One was during that very difficult time when I was having to do lots of different jobs after my marriage ended, I ran a course at what we called an outreach workshop, what the local authority called an outreach workshop. And they were for people who perhaps couldn't necessarily get into other writing workshops because of disabilities. One of the people there was a young girl in her 20s who'd had a stroke and who couldn't talk, but she could sing. And I couldn't understand how this could happen. And her father told me that this was something that can happen after a stroke. You might get what's called aphasia, where you can't speak, but for some reason the brain that controls the speech doesn't control the singing. So you can sing, and actually that can help you speak. So I decided that my main heroine, Janie, would have a stroke after the accident that she has and can sing. I also love the idea of historic crimes when something is discovered some years after the event. And so I thought, well, what would happen if that accident was caused perhaps by a young boy who perhaps had his reasons for not stopping? I mean, there should not be a reason for stopping, but I always like to give my baddie, as it were, a reason for doing what he or she did. Otherwise, they're two-dimensional. There is always a reason for something that someone does. And one doesn't necessarily condone it at all, but that reason exists to them. And so I made Robbie. I don't want to give too much away, but basically 20 years later, I make Robbie, who is by then a famous rock star. And this happens in chapter 2, so I'm not really
giving too much away. Exactly.
Yeah. He is arrested for the crime, and he goes willingly. He says, yes, that was me, but there's much more to it than that. And then the third reason I wrote this book is that I had a friend who took a voluntary job as a witness supporter, which is somebody who goes into a court and gives confidence to somebody who is giving evidence against the person in who's being charged for something. And that can be a very scary thing to do, to give evidence in court. And I introduced Vanessa, who's in her 60s. I make no bones about saying I'm in my 60s myself. I really love pushing older characters. And Vanessa wears wonderful bright colours, and she's very popular in court. She helps a lot of people. But Vanessa is hiding a secret that is also linked to the day that Janie had her accident. So those were the inspirations. Plus, there's an enormous character whom I haven't mentioned, and that's the sea. So I have always wanted to live by the sea. And I grew up near London. I didn't get to the sea until I was in my 50s with my second husband. And I swim every day in the sea. And I wanted this action to take place near the sea. In fact, all my books are set by the sea.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that you use so many twists and turns, and use, like you said, you use stuff that you learned in your life, and you wanted to make sure that, like, the older characters, the sea. I mean, you even sent me a picture and say, please use this picture, and it's you swimming in the sea. And I'm like, absolutely, because that's who you are, and that makes a big part of your writing. What made you decide to say, okay, I'm going to push the button and I'm going to publish this book? I'm going to write it and I'm going to publish it. And first of all, how long did it take you to write it? Because it's a pretty long book. It's got multiple chapters. I mean, lots of chapters in it.
Thank you. Well, I try to make my chapters fairly short so people can stop if they want to. Why did I write it? Well, because it was part of my 2-book deal. So the way it works is that I'm published by Penguin in the UK, and they have world rights. So they then sell it abroad. And as I said, they sold it to Doubleday. And I was already committed to writing this book as part of this ongoing 2-year contract. And as I said, the 2-year contract has been going for quite a long time now. So this is my 9th book, and I'm just about to publish my 10th next year.
Wow.
And what happens regarding the content of each novel is quite complicated, actually. So my editor in the UK will say, okay, so we're coming up to a contract renewal. What idea do you have for the next book? And I will tell her, because usually by the time I'm writing a book, by the time I've got to the middle of it, another idea will have dropped into my head for the next. And quite often I'll say, no, go away, idea, because I'm busy writing this one. But it won't. And I will need to make notes, which I will then look at when it comes to the turn of that novel. And then I'll go and talk to my editor and we'll thrash it out a bit. I don't like plotting in total detail. I like to know what the story is, the outline.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I write it, as my characters grow, as they become more like human beings, and that can take a few edits on my part before it even gets to my editor, then I will feel it. Then it will become a real being. And I can get ideas all the time where I'm not in a position always to write them down. I mean, swimming in the sea is a very good example. I will often be there and think, oh yes, that's what should happen to Janie. That's what Vanessa does. And then I will have to remember what happened and write it down, because very often it can go out of your head. So one tip I learned, and actually I got it from one of my children when he was doing history at school, was the history master was giving advice to parents on how to help children revise. And he said, imagine, they were doing Henry VIII. Imagine Henry VIII as a big cartoon, and imagine all the facts that go with him, like a giant cartoon, every little bit. And it actually does help you to remember things. So I have used that technique in remembering ideas.
Yeah, honestly, I know you just said that you don't plot out the whole thing when you're writing. You just kind of but did you ever surprise yourself when you're writing something, especially when I died on a Tuesday, where like, oh, I'm going to make this turn. I'm like, wait a second, that's not what I originally planned to do.
I did. There are always times in each novel where I surprised myself, and that's part of the joy of it. And you think, oh my gosh, yes, why didn't I think of that earlier? And that really is exciting. And you asked me earlier how long it takes to write. So my first draft it normally takes me about 4.5 months. And it's during that early draft that often ideas come in where I do what we've just said, oh my gosh, that could happen. But then as I do subsequent drafts, I often get eureka moments there as well. And that's when you know that the novel is a living, breathing thing. It's very exciting.
I love that. A living, breathing thing. Well, you have your book with you, and right now we need to take a commercial break. When we come back, are you up to reading an excerpt from it?
I'd love to. Thank you, Melissa.
All right. So here we go to a commercial.
People welcomed me, and they knew the pain of the journey that we'd been on because they'd been there too.
Other Parents Like Me is an online community, peer-led, for parents with kids struggling with mental health and or substances.
It's a space that's safe. Feels like I can actually share what's going on.
We offer 15 daily support groups per week and live speaker talks on Thursdays, as well as a monthly expert panel.
We also have a resource hub that has a toolkit. This includes over 1,000 articles, podcasts. There's a glossary with the most recent and relevant terms. And we have a directory that's been vetted.
The overwhelming feeling when we're sitting in a meeting and I'm telling my story and I see others shaking their head, tears falling. You know, they understand this roller coaster and they're along for the ride.
And we are back with Jane, who wrote I Died on a Tuesday, and she's going to read an excerpt of her book. And Jane, before, I've had a lot of people, and I forgot to tell you this before we went on, but I'm going to remove myself, but I'm still here. So that way the focus is on you while you're reading. So don't freak out if you don't see me on the screen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking me. And can I just say how moved I was actually by that commercial just now? Very, very moved by it.
Well,
yeah,
thank you.
Okay, so this is chapter 1. Chapter 1, 20 years ago, the day of the accident. Janie. On the day that I died, the sea was exceptionally flat. There was nothing to indicate that anything was amiss or that in 40 minutes I would be out of this world. Looking back, I can be quite precise about the time because it generally takes me 35 minutes to swim across the bay and back. If the sea is rough, it can take a little longer because you have to fight your way through the waves and pretend not to be frightened. I'm good at pretending, Besides, the sea doesn't like cowards. It can smell blood. I prop my bike against the railings opposite the seaside hotel, the only one open on the front now. In summer, it's quite busy, but autumn is setting in. Business will perk up a bit when it gets to half term, but right now I savour the peace. It's 6:30 in the morning. No one is around, not even a dog walker. It's as if the world has slept in. But the sun, that's awake all right. It's rising now before me like the tip of a giant beach ball bathed in apricot and gold. For a moment, I just stand there, drinking it in. If someone had made something like this in a factory and then put it in an art exhibition or the window of some fancy shop, it would sell for millions. But people take the sunrise for granted. I'm ashamed to say that I used to do that too, until everything changed.
And I absolutely love that. Bring
Thank
you
you
back.
very much.
I absolutely love that. Like I said, this book may be long, but it's a very quick read. Honestly, I was really impressed with how quick it was. I mean, it seemed like you didn't want to put it down. And that's the only problem I would see with the book is that you're like, oh, wait a second. You think to the point, you're at a stopping point. You're like, okay, I can stop now and go do something else. And then like you throw a monkey wrench in there and you're like, wait a second, I can't stop. I got to find out what happens next.
Well, that's a great compliment. Thank you very much.
So how much of Janie is you?
Well, first of all, choosing character names is very difficult. You can just use any name and somebody will say, oh, we've got a so-and-so like that in our family. Is that why you chose it? And it's not, but I thought it might be quite fun to use my name. And I'm Janie to my family. So that's why I called her Janie. And I do ride a bicycle and I do ride it down to the sea. And at times I have had near misses because people go past you perhaps too fast, or a lorry might go past. And so, yeah, I have had near misses, but not had a bad accident, touch wood. But that's it. That's where it ends. So again, going back to my journalist experience, because I interviewed so many characters over the years, that was actually a good grounding, I think, for me to imagine characters. So I never base my characters on a real person, but there will be a little characteristic that I might pick up from somebody, and I might mix it with a characteristic from somebody else, or maybe a problem I heard about years ago. So it's like a massive mixing bowl. And I should say I'm a dreadful cook. I cook there are about 5 dishes that work for me, and one of them is takeaway pizza. I'm only half joking. A baked pie. I can do a baked pie and fish pie. But cooking in a literary way is much more up my street. So I will bring characteristics in and make this person as different as I know from anybody else. But I will always give them a problem and a reason for the way in which they act.
I can see that. You had so many different characters in this book. I mean, there's a lot of juggling. How hard was it to juggle all these characters? Because you not just had one like main character. You had her, you had Vanessa, then you had Robbie, then you had all these side stories going on with everybody else. How hard was it to kind of keep it straight and to make sure that it kind of culminated at the end to the way it ended?
Well, it's a bit like writing a soap opera in some ways. You have main characters and you have the minor characters. And for me, Jane's voice, which is in the first person and is in italics, is the cement between the 2 other main characters, who are Robbie and Vanessa. I always tried to make these characters as different as possible. So, for example, Janie is in the first person, but Robbie and Vanessa are in the third. And Janie needed to be in the first person because she's commenting. I suppose the big twist, which I'm not really giving away too much because it's pretty obvious, because Janie keeps talking through the book, is that Janie actually doesn't die. She's in that stage where she hovers between life and death. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm fascinated by that. I've interviewed people who've been in that state, and it's an extraordinary part of life. with a mystery that perhaps we might not solve until we get there ourselves. And so I really felt that although there are lots of characters, I felt that because the two main ones, Robbie and Vanessa, they took the main space on the stage, it was not too much. This is what they did. This is the problem that they were facing. This was a situation, and Janie was giving the sort of the narrator from the sideline.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing I do to make it crystal clear, because I hate it when I read a book and I'm not quite sure whose point of view I'm reading it from, is that under every chapter heading, I give the name of the character, so the reader knows exactly which character they're reading about. And I will go from one person's predicament to the next one and then back again. So it'll be Janie, Robbie, Vanessa on the whole.
And with Janie also too, not only was she hurt in this accident, but she also has another underlying trauma that she's going through with the loss of her mom, which you say at the very beginning of the book. So I'm not giving anything away there, but trying to deal with her mom.
Yeah.
Disappearing.
So I've always been interested in mental health, and I wanted to bring that in, that her mother had issues which affected Janie as a child. Yes.
Yeah.
But
I think
this at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. I really think that had a great impact, because you're wondering, okay, here's this poor girl who doesn't, her mom's gone, her dad is there. She's struggling through life and death, and you're trying to figure out, okay, what actually happened. And then as you're going along through the story, you're like, wow. And the way you tied it up all in a neat bow at the end was like, I would have never thought about that, how their lives were intersecting.
Well, I mean, I didn't know how I was going to end it. I had a rough idea, but I do always like to end with a warm, feel-good feeling. And I like to tie up the ends. I want to explain why somebody did what they did. I like having forgiveness. I think forgiveness is a really important quality in life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like arguments. I don't like people falling out for years. It's not right. And so I do try to make everyone not necessarily be best friends at the end, but adjust to the situation that they're in.
And it's kind of a redemption story as well, because you see things that happen to you when you're younger. If you don't take responsibility for it, they can kind of explode.
Absolutely. No, very much so. And also looking back at opportunities that could have happened. I think a lot of us do, myself included, look back, spend quite a long time looking back actually at opportunities that perhaps we could have taken and didn't, and should we have done, but if we had, we wouldn't be here. And you can go on having this discussion with yourself ad nauseum. And I think that's quite a real feeling that many people have. So I do bring that in. But as I said, it's upbeat. One might think
mm-hmm.
from some of the events we've just been talking about that it's not upbeat, but actually it is, because things work out in the end in their different ways.
I will say the strength that Janie has in this book is one of the strongest characters I have seen in all the books I've read. Her strength to actually go through what she's gone through and not be bitter about stuff. And that's the thing, being left to die on the side of the road and then not being able to speak and only being able to sing, that would have put anybody, in such a bitter place. But Janie wasn't bitter. She wanted to do things, and she wanted to, be there to testify, and she wanted people to see her, because you described her as she's very grotesque wise.
Absolutely. And I make no bones about that. I mean, again, I've interviewed people who've had all kinds of facial disfigurements, etc. And I wanted to make her strong. Strong women to me are important. Strong people are important, but there's something about strong women. I'm always saying to my daughter, we come from a line of strong women, and we do. Each of the generations that I know about have had their own big issues to deal with, and I like to think we've come through.
Do you think any of the issues that, like you said, the strong women, you will put down in another book?
Oh yes, all my books are like that. Coming to Find You, which was also published by Doubleday in America and Canada last year, that was very much about strong women, actually set in the Second World War and the present day. So two strong women living in the same house, 80 years apart. And it's not a ghost book in any way, but it's the house is a character. And each of those women were very strong. And I think that it's an important element. So yes, I think I nearly every one of my books has got a strong woman in it, and a strong man as well, I should say.
I love the fact that you give inanimate objects a big part of your books. Like you talk about, this one is like the sea, and then you just said the one that you just mentioned that is the house. How important is that to have those types of characters as well?
Well, I think it's important because it allows the reader to envisage the novel, to really see it visually. I mean, when I'm writing, it's like seeing a film in my head. And the sea is always a character in all my books. So My Husband's Wife, which was also published in the States and Canada, The Dead Ex and Blood Sisters, they were published in the States and Canada as well. They all had strong women. And most of them, actually, I'm trying to remember which one doesn't, most of them have the sea in it. And houses are enormous characters, aren't they? Where you live, where anyone lives, has a character. So do dogs and other animals. So there are lots of ways in which we can bring other characters in. And I think it's important because it sets the whole scene.
Now, you said earlier that when you write a book, another idea comes for another book. What popped up when you were writing I Died on a Tuesday?
Well, I'm not allowed to say.
Oh.
It comes out in Canada and the States a year after the UK. So my next book, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to reveal the title yet, but I'm happy to tell you next year. But that one comes out in 2026. In fact, sometimes I have to stop and think, now which year are we in? Because
yeah, I know I'm still writing 2024 and everything, and I'm like, wait a second, it's not 2024. So do you ever think, when you said you always wanted to write, you were bad at math, did you ever think that you were going to write as many books as you've written?
No. And, I still have imposter syndrome. I mean, my kids will say, oh, Mum, this is really cool or whatever. And I kind of cringe. I kind of feel embarrassed. I think, oh, am I worthy of this? Have I really done this? If that little girl who had been so shy and would squirrel herself away in corners to write short stories knew this was going to happen, I think she'd have been happier as she grew up.
So how do you fight the imposter syndrome, though?
I don't think I can. I think it possibly comes from years of being told that you weren't good at things, and perhaps the thing that you were good at wasn't necessarily recognized. I thought everyone could write stories. I didn't see it as being anything special. So
has that ever stopped you from saying, I don't want to write anymore, or I shouldn't be writing?
No. If I couldn't write, I wouldn't be breathing. I need to write. To me, it's like air that I need to breathe. No, I love writing. I love it. I mean, the magic for me is getting that idea and starting it. So I've just finished my book for, let me just work this one out. I have just finished writing the first draft for my 2026 book, but that won't come out in America until 2027. And the magic of that, the magic of writing and the excitement is just really what I live for. But, I am also very much a family person. I do a lot with my grandchildren. And I love I love my family very much. So I do other things as well. I do play tennis. I do voluntary work with my writing, actually. So I worked in the prison for 3 years, 2 days a week, which is another story in itself. I sometimes think my life might make a movie. But afterwards, when I left and I married my second husband and we moved to the sea, I volunteered to be a life story writing judge for a charity called the Kessler Awards, which gives awards to men and women in prison for writing. And as I mentioned earlier on, writing can help people address things that they've done. And one of the reasons I was employed in the prison was that this apparently helped to lower the reoffending rate. And often I would get men who would say, actually, by writing down what I've done, it's made me realize how bad that is. Because again, people have imposter syndrome in prison. They don't like to think that they don't always like to think that they've done what they've done. I remember one man who left, and as he left, he said, "It didn't happen," and he was referring to. So as I said, voluntary work is important to me, and I also love going to bookshops and signing books and talking to readers who want to write themselves, because I remember what it was like when I was desperate to write. I would go miles to hear writers talking about how they write. And am I allowed to say that I'm really excited because I've just heard that I'm Indigo's staff pick of the month, which is very exciting for me. And so again, I love going to bookshops.
Have you ever been recognized in a bookshop and someone say, "Oh my gosh, you read this book. I love this book"?
Yes, I have actually. And what was really, really nice was I went to an old school reunion 3 months ago. We were all very nervous about going. And when I got to the beautiful old library where I was school librarian, I found it had gone, and they'd made space for something completely different. And I was heartbroken. And then I found that instead they built this massive library. I mean, I have to say that I preferred the original. But when I went there, the librarian, when I gave my name, because we had to give our name, she said, "Oh, are you Jane Cory? We have your books here. We've read your books." And that was very exciting.
I can imagine. Now, how do you balance it all? You said you're very involved with your grands and your family. How do you balance writing in your family?
I don't think I balance it very well, really. I write a lot. I have a very understanding husband who, when I say, "Oh, I'm just going up to my study for a bit," doesn't seem to mind when I come down much later than I thought I might be. And so my day always starts with a swim. And if the sea is too rough, then I'll go for a walk. I have a great friend who lives over the road, and we swim together for safety and for friendship, and we walk if we can't. And then I'll have breakfast, and then I'll start writing. And I'll write through till lunchtime, and then in the afternoon, I'll do some other stuff, including a school run, and then I look after my grandchildren in the holidays. So if I'm looking after them in the holidays, I move my writing time so that I then write more in the evening. And all through my life, I've had to change my writing times to adapt to the situations I've been in. So when I was, again, after my first marriage ended and I had to do all these different jobs, I would write my novels in the evening and sometimes write through till 2 a.m. So the stage I'm at now is the one I've just described, but who knows, that might change. But there always in my life, there needs to be at least 3 to 4 hours a day when I can write. Otherwise, I don't feel right. And that's a bit of a pun, if I don't write, I don't feel right.
Yeah, I totally can see that, because sometimes when you got that creativity flowing, it just seems like everything else sinks into your life the way it's supposed to.
But I also, talking of creativity, I also love painting. And I've sent you a picture of some lemons that I painted, just to give you an idea of some of the other things I do in my life. And I think it goes back to having a visual mind when I'm writing a book.
Do you ever think this book, I Died on a Tuesday, will become a movie or maybe a basis of a soap opera? Because I was thinking EastEnders when I was reading this.
Thank you. Well, I would love that. And if anyone's listening to this who'd be interested, please get in touch with with Doubleday, and they can direct you to my film and TV agents, who are actually a branch of Penguin. So I would just love it. So my husband's wife at the moment is under option. So, but that's more like a shopping agreement. So there isn't actually anyone. Well, nothing's certain. Nothing is certain. Everyone keeps telling me that it takes years and years, and then you read to some people who get published 1 year and are on the screen 3 years later, and that would be great. I would love that. And
honestly, I think it's whoever gets the book in their hands. Like if a Hollywood actress or somebody's reading it and they want, like, oh, I really want to turn this into a movie or something, then yes, it gets turned into it.
Yeah. Well, my certainly the Janie part and the Vanessa part, they're both very strong women, and there are certain characters, certain actors and actresses that I would love to play them.
Oh, well, now you just opened up the question. Who would you love to play them?
Well, I'm a great admirer of Nicole Kidman, for example, and I really like Julie Walters. In fact, I interviewed Julie Walters years and years ago when I was in my 20s. So Reese Witherspoon. I mean, there are lots of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that 100%. Do you ever think when you started writing and you started selling your books, like I know you said at the beginning, if you did not write, you wouldn't know what to do. Did you ever think that you were going to have as much success as you have with your books?
No, I had no idea at all. And I still had to pinch myself. Even when you say that as much success, I still had to pinch myself. No, I just feel incredibly lucky, because there are also some very good writers out there who don't get an agent or a publisher. And it's not because of their writing. It's because it's a very hard, tough world out there. So I do feel very lucky, and I also feel I owe a lot to the prison because although none of my characters are based on real people, but working in the prison taught me what the atmosphere was like. I mean, you can't write about prison properly, in my view, unless you've been there. So when my husband's wife was first optioned, because often books are optioned and then they pay you some money. They don't always pay you money, actually, if it's a shopping agreement, but the first time it was optioned, it did pay me a bit of money. And I used that money to fund another writer in residence for the prison that I'd left, because I knew they couldn't afford another. And I also felt that I owed the prison. And I also knew how it had helped people to be able to write about their lives, because the guards would tell me that certain people would behave better, and I was told by the men that it stopped them banging their heads against the wall or banging somebody else's head against the wall, because they were able to write it all out, because writing is a great therapy.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It gets things out of your head and onto paper, and then it seems like it's not disappeared, but now it's not taking up that space in your head anymore.
No, exactly. So if I ever did get a book, if I ever was optioned and then that went to something, then I would definitely give part of that to fund another residency, because I feel so strongly in it. I also think that in life you need to give things back.
I love that. I love that 100%, because most of the time when you see people that are writing or authors, they give back, but they only give back to like certain things. But you're taking a part of the community that's kind of just, okay, they've done their crime, they're locked away, they're forgotten. And you're like, no, they're still human beings. There's still qualities in there that make them human beings, and they're human, and they need to learn.
But at the same time, I'm constantly aware that every person that I worked with has totally ruined somebody else's life and a family's life. And that pull was constantly with me. And that's why I wanted in I Died on a Tuesday to show how Jane's life had been ruined because somebody didn't stop.
Yeah, but in the end, though, you have that redemption of where people are like realize they made a mistake. And like you said, when they're writing stuff down and they don't think it's as terrible as what they did, but then they write it all down, they're like, oh my gosh.
Yes. Yeah.
What made me do all this stuff?
Exactly. So I had one man whose life story I was writing, and he couldn't actually physically write. So I had permission from the governor to take my laptop in as long as it wasn't connected to the internet. And he would dictate his life story and I would write it down. And I don't want to tell you what he did because it might identify him. But it was so shocking that I found myself bursting into tears. And then I thought, oh, this is dreadful because this isn't professional. And I went and found a member of staff and told her, and she said, well, actually, you know, it might have done him some good. So the next morning I went back and we continued, and he told me that he couldn't sleep all night because he'd upset me. And I said, but it's not me you need to think about. It's those people that you terrify. He wasn't actually a murderer, but he had scared some people witless through the terrible thing that he had done to them. And that man, then, his behavior improved. He won a gold star for his entry to a prison competition. This gave him kind of confidence to be better, if that doesn't sound like a contradiction. And his behavior improved so much that he went through the different categories of prison to end up in a lower category, which means that he will get out in I don't know how many years. But the most important thing is that he really came to grips with what he had done through writing and through saying it.
I think that's important, that a lot of people, they are so quick to blame everybody else for something they did, when they come to the realization that they actually did it and it's their fault. It's not anybody else's fault.
Exactly. Yes.
Now our time is almost up. Is there one last little nugget before we share where people can find you that you want to share, either something we talked about or something that we didn't hit on that you would like to talk about?
Well, I think we've covered so much. I'd like to say a really big thank you to Doubleday, my publishers. And I'd like to say a big thank you to you for having me. I just love the whole title, The Blog Cabin. I think it sounds very exciting. And I just want to tell people that if they want a twist in a novel, but also real characters that have their own issues with a warm, happy ending on the whole, then hopefully they might like my books.
I think they will like your books. I think there's something for everybody because you have a strong female character, then you have the strong male character with Robbie, and then you have Vanessa you throw in. So there's somebody for each age. So I love that. Now, where can people find you at?
So in bookshops and Amazon. So in Canada, as I said, the staff pick for Indigo for this month, which is very exciting. Walmart, Barnes and Noble, lots and lots of different, or you can follow the link which you very kindly got up on screen. And I'd love to hear from people to see whether they like the book. If they want to write a review, that would be wonderful. It's good to get feedback, and I'm on lots of different social medias, from Twitter to TikTok, etc.
Okay, I'm throwing her Twitter up, and then she's on Threads as well as Instagram, and she just said TikTok and Facebook, and I'll put all these links in the show notes where you can find her. But she also has a website. You want to talk about your website?
Yes. So my website gives some writing tips. If anybody here is wanting to write, there are some tips on that, and it tells you a bit about what I'm doing. And so it would just be, as I said, great to have any reviews if you feel like writing reviews, because that's always important for readers, and love to know what people like and don't like.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for coming on. And guys, I will definitely put in all the show notes where you can find Jane, as well as where you can find her books. I'm actually linked I Died Out on Tuesday on Amazon, but I'll go through and I'll do your author's page. Do you have an author's page on Amazon?
Yes, I do have an author's
that
page.
Way, if you like the I Died on Tuesday, you can just, because if you're anything like me, once you find an author that you love, you want to read everything that the author has written.
Well, that would be lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And it's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. So Jane, thank you for coming on, and I cannot wait for your book to come out in 2027. So you're welcome to come back on when your book comes out, because you've got a reader in me. I mean, I really love this book. At the beginning, I was like, okay, what's going on? And then I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
Thank you so much. And 2026. So I have another one in 26 and then one in 27. So one a year. So yes.
You're welcome to come back whenever the other books get published.
Love to do that. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys, like I said, I will put in the show notes everywhere where you can find Jane, as well as I Died on a Tuesday. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, bye.